So this is the fourth briefing we've had in regards to the Belfair Sewer Plan development, which started off with a state auditor's finding regarding financial feasibility of the Belfair Sewer, which then subsequently expanded to include Russell Road. And we talked about what are the options that we can look at in order to mitigate the issue in regards to financial feasibility of all of our utilities, sewer utilities. Some of the decisions that we've made up to this point included identifying options that would increase revenues, potentially expand service area, which would give us a broader base to charge sewer services specifically for Belfair Sewer. Look at options of reducing O&M costs, as well as look at options to reduce debt service. So based on that, some of the decisions that we've made, based on our last meeting with the Finance Committee, was to not look to extend the terms of the financing for the Belfair Sewer, as it presented an increase in the cost for the sewer of anywhere between $2 million to roughly a little over $5 million because of additional interest as well as payments for extended terms. So we're paying an extra 5 or in some cases 10 years. So the decision there was made to look at utilizing $650,000, which is relatively the shortfall for the Belfair Sewer currently from a financial perspective, and fund that from the REIT funds. And continue using .09. One of the things that we talked about yesterday, day before, in regards to the capital facilities plan, which looks at REIT funding for other projects, both facilities within the county as well as REIT 2, which is predominantly parks and park expansion and park projects. So using those funds would require a reprioritization of what those projects are and how many there are and where they would be, and we're in the process of doing that. Moving towards going forward with the $650,000, the additional $650,000 of REIT funding to supplement Belfair Sewer. We also already looked and discussed the fact that the O&M costs that we currently have, which have dropped down to about $500,000 a year, is probably low because we have not, in the last couple of years, included what would need to be mandatory or necessary capital improvements. So the system is now 5-6 years old, and there are certain capital maintenance requirements. The systems are needing repair, pump stations, seals, and things of that nature. That is in the normal cycle of a facility. You don't see that happening right away, but somewhere in the 5-year to 10-year cycle, those things begin to increase. So our estimate of around $450,000 to $500,000 worth of O&M is probably low because it's missing a component for capital needs. When the Belfair Sewer plan was put together back in the planning stages from 2009 into 2012, maintenance O&M was expected to be around $625,000. And that's about where it really does need to be. It should be $625,000, $650,000, I think, is the number that we're comfortable with. So where I was going with that was the current status for supplementing Belfair transfers $450,000 out of 2009 sales tax, as well as $150,000 out of REIT. This $650,000 in our mind is in addition to the $150 that's already coming out of REIT, because that 150 is necessary to up the O&M costs, that up the O&M component of the Belfair finances. So what we have is a document that we prepared. It's a draft document. It discusses what we've done in the previous 3 briefings, what some of the questions have been, and what the options are that are necessary for consideration by the board. And just really briefly, in order to look at increasing revenues, we talked about needing to visit how we do and set up our ERU rates, not only for Belfair, but for all of our utilities. We need to look at what we want to do with the CFC charges for this year. The current code expires, or the lower CFC rates expired in 2017, and in the current code, it's moved up considerably. I think it's around 16,200 or 300 is what the current CFC hookup charge is. One of the things we considered was developing a much lower rate to entice additional construction, to entice individuals to actively look to hook up into the system. The concern is there, or the caveat there is, if we do collect a CFC charge on a parcel that has not hooked up, the RCWs require us to have sewer to this parcel within 10 years. Otherwise, we're liable to need to repay those CFC charges with interest. So, however we develop a CFC charge program, the ultimate result has to be tied to the expansion program, so that as we're collecting those CFCs, our plan says we will have pipe in front of your house or within 500 feet within the next 10 years. So the theory here is we shouldn't be charging CFCs on what was the old Phase 4 project, but that's going to be the last one that we hook up, and we start construction on that in 11 years from now, because we would need to repay those. So those need to correlate. The other areas we looked at was expanding the service area. So in here we have recommendations and proposals in regards to looking at ULIDs, looking at what was proposed originally as a land bridge to include Lynch Cove and North Shore area, as well as opportunities to expand into the PSIC area, as well as the opportunities to look at what was the original plan to expand into Old Belfair highway connection, and then the Newkirk, and then I forget what the fourth one was, the fourth phase in that sequence. So those again are considerations that the Commission is going to need to look at to see, do we want to continue down that path? Where does PSIC fit into that? Does that come in front of the Old Belfair highway connection? Does the Old Belfair highway connection get replaced with the Roy Bode option that's been presented? And how does that tie up with what the community's developers are looking to do currently, and where are the best opportunities for expansion currently? All of that's going to require a review of all of our existing documentation. So we've talked many times around what is it that says that we have to have 1,800 hookups by 2017. After having conversation with the Department of Commerce and Department of Ecology, we realized that we, in our UGA and in our environmental impact statement with addendums and in our comp plan, we defined those terms and developed a plan that said by 2017 we would have 1,864 ERUs in Belfair. Well, that didn't come to fruition. There's a number of reasons why. The reality is that we've got 416. So we need to go back to the Department of Commerce, rewrite under the Growth Management Act of the sewer plan as we have it currently, which says 1,864 ERUs by 2017, with something that's a little more realistic. They've indicated that they would be more than happy to work with us in order to accomplish that. They have also said, be careful, you can't stop the plan. In other words, you can't come to them to say, our plan is not to continue building out Belfair sewer. We have to have some kind of a program that develops sewer facilities into the Belfair UGA. There is no requirement as to how quickly that needs to occur, but it cannot just basically stop. So they're willing to work with us in how to go through the process and redevelop that. But again, it takes the decisions from the commission as to how quickly and in which areas you want that expansion to occur and or not to occur. So the questions that we have and what I have, what we put together and I've brought forward on numerous occasions is a list of requirements that we would need to look at to rewrite what documents and for what purpose. So if the decision of the commission is to do A or B, those rewrites would be different. In other words, if we're going to slow it down such that we're only going to do PSIP and not expand into Old Belfair, then the EIS addendums and comp plans need to reflect those realities. So we need that direction prior to even thinking about how to rewrite these documents. But once that's defined, then we can go in and put the rubber to the road, so to speak, and create these documents, work with the separate departments, and then reconstruct a plan for the Belfair sewer. One of the things that the state auditor is going to want to look at is how do we restructure and address our rate program. Right now, our rates are $96. In some of the planning that was done in 09 through 2012, $96 was proposed as the rate, but in that planning, it was also identified that it would need to go up to at least $121 by 2017 for financial feasibility. That is still an arbitrary number because the actual cost to the existing customers to cover the current Belfair debt service and O&M would be somewhere around $340 per ERU per month, which is not feasible.
Right, was that under the 340 before adding this additional 150 for maintenance?
That's correct.
So it's
340.
yeah, it's before.
That's before.
The extra 150.
So that would make it around 370. I think 150 at about $30.
$30 per ERU.
Per ERU per month. So that would necessitate a $370 increase. So
That doesn't make sense, because if they had assumed a O&M of 600,
in their analysis for $121, the numbers were much different. Their projection showed by this time we would have 1,800 ERUs.
I think it was 900 something. At this time.
Either way, it was more than before.
Yeah.
968 or something.
So some of the issues in regards to what is the number that we promised. So some of the planners had put forth numbers, 1,864, and then when we went for application for these loans, we had changed some of the numbers around. So some of the applications say 1,864, but the planning documents identify 900 as.
Well, that was what the dollar amount was based on.
ERUs and things of that nature. So there was inconsistency in how we looked at our financial structure of Belfair when we were going for the lending and the loans. So we'll need to address how to do a rate analysis and how we want to structure the rates. Do we want to link all of our utility rates together into one? Do we want to separate the rates? Technically, they have to include, the rates for one utility cannot be the same as another utility simply because you want to keep the rates the same. However, if the overarching O&M and operating costs are relatively similar, and in our case, we do a lot of personnel overlap. So we have a base management structure that overlaps all of the utilities, and they get allocated costs. Those costs would be per utility relatively the same. The differences between the rate setting would then be based on capital needs. So if we can define how we look at those, it doesn't dictate that the rates are going to need to be the same for each of the utilities, but that the method of analyzing what the rate is the same. In some cases, currently we are increasing rates based on number that is brought forward. In other cases, we don't increase rates. In other cases, we look at the CPI and increase rates. Those, I think, should be looked at, and we should come up with some consistent mechanism to do rate analysis.
Just to share with you, Frank.
Sure.
I did the numbers real quick, and it was based on the 968, you're looking at $1.46 million per year at that other rate. That's what they had it figured out at.
Mhm.
The 1,800 was for the planning.
Was in the planning.
Yeah, not the finance.
So with all of those questions answered, then we can come back and start working on the rewriting of the plans. One of our recommendations is that we put together a sewer plan. We have a myriad of documents that address that currently. It's in the EIS, it's in the comp plan, it's in our code, it's in our UGA, but there is under RCW 85, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's in the document. There is the ability to create an overarching sewer plan, sewer and water plan, that would direct the county's utility services as far as overarching policies and processes would be concerned. That would give us a place for the commission to codify its desires, which then the rest of the utilities and the rest of the county can then go forward and enact. Again, what I have is a document that Dave and Jerry and I have put together that identifies a number of checklist items. We would ask that the commission review these. Behind that are a number of supporting documents that discuss in detail some of the issues around rate setting, what were previous thoughts around budgeting, what are projected construction costs for the different new phases, for you to use as support in making decisions around how you want to address creating a formalized plan based on your direction and your decisions. We have no briefings next week, but if we can come back the following week on June 7th with the ability to have a commissioner discussion around the desires of the commission to put down in a document that we would then come back to the commission with, which is the plan for a sewer plan, if that makes sense.
Plan to plan for a plan.
Yeah, plan to develop a plan. And that would give us, that wouldn't delay this process any further, but at this stage, I think we've outlined all of the options. We've created a checklist and a matrix to say, these are the things that we need to do in order to accomplish what you would like. And then go through that checklist and say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. Given the decisions that we've already made, around the 650,000 and some of the other decisions that we have come forward with.
Are there any decision points today?
Okay,
He has some that he wants to bring forward.
so,
Dave would like to discuss some of the
on Title 17.
underlying issues.
So we've got a number of things kind of going on. I did take a second run at Title 17, and as I went through the code, I took out the holding tanks and went back into it in a little more detail. And then I added Alan to the discussion as well, so it's Belfair and Alan, so I really wanted some consistency across the two UGAs. If we're going to write policy, let's have a consistency. I did put, when I addressed the capital facilities charge, and we talked about this a little bit before, should sewer connections not become available within, and I had 15 years, because I got that from an old source, but I think it's 10. We need to double check that number. The customer is entitled to a refund. I did look at ways of doing a refund, so I did 2% per year or CPI, whichever is lower, just as a starting point for a discussion.
That word entitled, is that your word, or is that what you read? Because that has a specific meaning.
And that's what I pulled from a couple of other documents. I looked at Spokane's for some of this
Because you
language.
may be able to give the opportunity to continue forward from that point.
Right, so on the next one, I said, if the customer elects to receive a refund, so elects to receive a refund, and sewer becomes available later, the customer would pay the CFC in effect at the time, so they could elect to keep it. So I
Apply towards the down payment of the,
So you,
yeah,
Right,
The new rate?
what's that?
of the then current CFC rate.
Okay. So what are you referring to on the 2%?
So if we don't get sewer out there within 10 years, they're entitled to get their money back plus interest.
Plus.
Right. So I just tried to put in code, just a starting point of a discussion on how you would calculate interest. And I need to run that by the prosecutor's office and make sure that's okey-dokey.
And that prepay where there's no sewer line, could we make that only available in areas that we decide is the next place we're going?
I think that's essential.
That is essential, is that you define where those areas are.
Right. So this code,
Yeah.
this code is a starting point. It's like unraveling a bowl of spaghetti as you get into this a little bit. So,
And the modifications that he's talking about are in.
you're in your
Well,
packets.
can you direct us to the page?
So it's titled Mason County Code Rewrites of Title 15. It's about,
Third of the way through.
yeah, third of the way through.
one of the ways, things we have going for us on that is that the past commission may have stricken the term phases out of many of the documentation, but they never actually did away with the phases, with the mapping for the phases. So if you're gonna,
And see, I don't address phases in this.
yeah, but we can still utilize those phase boundaries to decide what area we would give the discounts to.
Right. So, and I made a point of not using the term phase, just because it could change.
And you can change that.
Right.
So as you get to the next expansion area, 4 years from now, you can define it to be a different way.
Right. So on page 1 of the document, in the first part, I basically eliminate the use of holding tanks and allow the use of on-site septic as a transitional strategy to serve isolated pockets and where on-site is the best available technology for the particular location. So,
You
and
go
then,
on to say what those, how you determine best available technology?
I haven't, and I pulled this right out of RCW. Those first 3 things are right out of RCW. So I figure I can go back and look at the definitions in the enabling legislation. So if I need
I just
to.
want to make sure that everybody in the planning office is on the same page about what
And that's
that
where
is.
it comes through my office.
Okay.
So we took out holding tanks as you go down through. Did a couple name changes. So we took it out of public health and human services and put it into community services. On page 2, we took out the pumping being required by Mason County because Mason County simply does not have the ability to pump. We talked about the capital facilities charges, and those are the things that we were just talking about. Defining the refund over a 10-year time period, how the refund is calculated, and then if there's an election, the person elects to take the refund or they don't. If they're in paragraph 8, I talk about decommissioning the on-site septic system. Paragraph 9, I looked at, if we have places where we have the ability to do a large on-site septic system that may say serve 5 or 6 homes, then the county should be the operator of those large on-site septic systems. And that would give the county the ability, once sewer becomes available, to repurpose those facilities into transfer stations or pumping stations. And it just looked like a cleaner way to do things.
But if we were to do that, would we also take on the responsibility of fixing it if it breaks? And paying for all the,
But you'd also have management fees that would go along with it, just like a water system. So it's a way I saw that a number of communities have addressed that. So, and then subdivisions. So if we have a subdivision in UGA that's initially served by sewer, and not initially served by sewer, we require them to put in sewer mains at the construction time of water systems and roadways. So if the mains were in place, and we would waive the CFC during that phase, so that, to encourage them to put the sewer mains in place. And I think that, oh, and then I went on to, on page 3,
Say who's responsible for paying that?
developer.
Latecomers agreement.
So, and then the binding site plan essentially stays the same. So this, we talked before, we need to get this moving further along and into the path to start getting that dealt with as early as possible, because it really is, in some ways, adjacent to this other process.
an already in process, so.
And already in process, so we're working on it. The other thing I wanted to bring forward is the discussion on water quality. So I went back and pulled the data for 20 years of water quality in the north end of the canal there around Belfair State Park. So if you look at the graphs are in there too. Okay. So if you look,
It's like the third or fourth page from the end.
in about 2006-07 is when the Belfair State Park large on-site septic system became operational. And you see how the water quality immediately improved. I mean, it just, the fecal coliform took a sharp dive for the next couple of years. And we had a period of about 6 years of really exceptional water quality. We're now starting to see the water quality degradation start to creep up to where we're within just a few percentage points of being the place where we're at.
You remember talking about that the other day? You want to ask a question for the others? Rob, do you remember when they took out that Belfair State Park thing and put in that whole new way of doing business? Remember they used to have that whole area thing drained out into that area. It worked as maybe as a filter. The swimming area at Belfair State Park.
I'm gonna say 7 or 8.
So, right?
This was a little later than that, or?
No, that's when you see the big drops. From 2006 down to 2008, it drops dramatically.
Yeah, there was also a big change at that time when the water quality came up at the Belfair State Park, because the tribes had stopped. At the corner, they stopped dumping the fish carcasses. And that was an active thing that they actually did. They specifically did
I
that.
forgot about that.
And that was a big part of
Okay,
it.
so that's good background information that I don't see anywhere.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's good to know. But we're starting to see it creep back up again, and I was looking at the data points and the locations of the data points, and I'm not making any clear causations yet. Because if you look at the one out in front of Belfair State Park is lower than the ones to the left and right.
Which station, that's 368?
So the lowest are on the far side, on the south shore. But it's just kind of inconsistent. The one furthest to the east in the northeast corner is the highest
Today.
today. So I don't, without doing more work, I don't know that we could tell if it's coming from the Sandy Hill area, if that's, degradation is coming from there, or where exactly it's coming from.
So this is, and the purpose of this discussion is to.
Just-
identify whether there's a floodplain.
Right, so when I look at the sewer areas and the things we've talked about, when I look at the North Belfair Highway area and 170 lots there, it seems to be less of a concern on the public health end of things on soils and densities than there are in other places that have higher densities, more permeable soils, and effects on water quality.
This analysis was precipitated by our conversation or our discussion around the letter that was sent by the Department of Health in 2002, identifying the fact that at that time, on-site sewage systems, 54 of 102 homes evaluated were either failing or suspect. So that precipitated the conversation around expanding the Belfair sewer into the North Shore and into the Belfair Park area, which was then subsequently dropped in planning phase, in the planning conversation. This letter has never been resolved, or the issue that was identified has never been resolved. And so our question was, is there an underlying issue still today in that area? And the data is somewhat representing the fact that there may be. It's not saying that there is. I don't think that's any conclusive.
Right.
There's nothing conclusive in here, other than things are beginning to creep up again.
Right, so I want to make sure that we had an idea of the background, because I didn't understand the background, being new here. So I wanted to look at the actual data, and what the data tells me. In the letter 2002, it doesn't say suspected failure. Well, failure is defined as sewage on the ground or sewage actually leaking someplace. So on the surface or leaking into something else. And it was never defined in the letter what exactly that meant.
I think in that area, you have that map too?
Yeah.
I think that area, is that where the red barn is? Is that the red barn and the end of
Is it that far down?
that construction site where
Yeah,
where you're having an issue with the church, where they have an issue with I think that's the area.
Near Gladwin?
Yes.
That's like a big church.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
So I had the Department of Health dig this up because I didn't have any documentation to back up what their letter said. So, obviously there was a problem, a huge problem that was resolved rather quickly. So apparently from two different things, so you have two actions about the same time.
One the Belfair State Park and one the fish park.
Right. So,
And it's in our letter. So 287 and 286 would be affected by homes
In Belfair.
in the UGA area.
No, I think it's the outside.
287, 286 is more the south shore. So the Union, of course, drains into the northeast corner.
What's the name of that road?
You can kind of see.
Huckleberry,
This
whatever that first word, Hummingbird.
there.
I think that's Hummingbird area.
Yeah.
It is.
So 287, 286 are our lowest of our three, are part of our three lowest data points.
Also, that's the area where from that area over where the state bought that property and stuff too. So they actually took buildings off of there. That used to be there.
So yeah, I was looking at data points, data locations, and trying to make correlations, and I just haven't yet. So I'm going to have to do it with my water quality folks and see if they know something more than I know.
I do want to let you know that in reading your thing, you do actually still talk about phasing, but I think it's necessary in order to stay within the growth management hearing board's decision, or else we won't be able to have any growth at all if we don't have some kind of plan that includes phasing. But the statement is use of on-site sewer systems as a transitional strategy where there is a development phasing plan in place. But I think it's phasing is necessary.
Okay, so I'll leave as is then.
So the documentation that you have includes lots of supporting documentation in regards to some of the historical reviews and processes that have occurred, and some of the thinking that was put into how that came about.
Would this be possible to adopt before we actually did the phasing?
I think it's necessary in order to keep development moving forward.
Even despite the,
Right.
Well, we still have.
if we use, I'm sorry, if we use section 1AI, where it's, where we're using it because it's part of the, where people can use it because it's part of the phasing plan, that is off the table until we actually have the phasing.
No, because I think you can still use it as a transitional strategy.
You have one currently.
Again, remember that, that's what I was saying earlier, they never actually did away with phasing, they just took out the reference to the
I
term.
understand that, but we don't know where we're doing it.
Yeah, but it gives us three options, so there's
That
three
was
things.
the old plan.
So we can use it
We
as,
don't know how we're doing
we
it.
can use it as transitional, we can use it to serve isolated pockets, which certainly North Belfair has what I would consider isolated pockets. And then places where it's the best available technology, so if you're having to transition, large wetlands to get to an isolated property, it's probably the best technology is to have on-site septic on those remote parcels.
And to let significant development move forward, we would need to be able to use the eye
And I think we can
rationale, right?
Well, but I don't think that would limit it. I think it would just, it calls out that there is a phasing plan and we're going to adopt that.
Because if we charge CFCs, that's an admission that there is a phasing plan that's going to address this property at some point.
And to go to your original question, that's what I was trying to make a statement on. Right now, just adding this in there, it automatically goes back to the plan that's in place. The plan that's in place does have the phasing plan. We may change that, but it would allow us to continue to do whatever we're doing because it's already accepted by the state.
And I don't think, I think the areas are all, you're working with a limited amount of space. Your phasing isn't going to change drastically from what it is now. I think we're just going to change the sequencing of things and.
The timelines.
Right.
Plus, if we move forward with this, we can get to the planning commission and get the first blush of public input.
So I kind of made a couple of notes, and I was looking at the recommendations, and so I'll take more time before the 7th to sort of, hash out my list here a little bit better, but as I kind of start to break it up into short, mid, and long range, how to move forward, I think short term, the holding tanks has to move forward now, and I think that can happen before we get back, we can put that in motion before the 7th. So in the next couple of weeks, I can get on the docket for the pack, I think. And then having a conversation about the CFC charges, and I think the rate analysis, which will cause some indigestion, no doubt. But I think having a fair and updated look at the rates is going to be an important part of our discussion about phasing, and maybe the rates don't change. Maybe there's some middle ground, certainly not going to 370. So, but I think that's an important part of the conversation, and I believe Commissioner Jeffries mentioned that the other day as well. So, at first blush, those are the three things that I think we could start moving on between now and the 7th.
What about CFCs in an existing area, but the incentivized?
The multifamily thing we talked about.
And I think at this point, we need to just have it be any development on the sewer, on the existing sewer line.
As long as we get it, I'm good with it. I just think, again, because each time we keep asking for that to be immediate, I think the $5,000 at bare minimum for multifamily, but I'm not going to argue with $5,000 hookup for anybody that's on the existing line.
Yeah.
But we have to have the multifamily as soon as possible.
So is that something that could be a part of, between now and the 7th?
We can get that ready for the pack.
Yeah.
So I think this is pretty close to being ready to go to the pack.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go back through Title 13 and make sure that it scrubs out that and make any changes to the 13.
Which is 13. What's the top of that? Oh, sorry.
So 17 is zoning, land use
13's utilities.
Utilities, yeah.
And that's where the brakes and the CFCs.
Well, I just want to make sure that we don't have references to holding tanks in that particular part. Make sure we pull any of that language out.
But that's how we also had referenced in the past on how we've done, for what year that we put in place. So if we're gonna change any of that, it has to go there too.
Right. So,
Can I ask the commission to consider something between now and then? First of all, I would like to do that right away, but I'd like you to consider a couple of things, because it was mentioned that the $30 per month that was needed just to cover the 150, that we should have the citizens do it. I just want to share with you that would mean an increase of $11,000 a year for QFC and an increase of $4,000 a year for the laundromat, which means at some point, not only do we lose customers and go backwards because with the citizenry, but once you start losing the businesses, you lose larger numbers of it. I'd also like you to consider, when we're looking at zoning or phasing how we would do it, and what areas we would go into, to please weigh it off with, we keep talking about the areas that we might get the greatest return from eventually from building, which sounds good on paper, but the problem we have is an investment, and that would be a long term. We'd have an outlay of cash now with no money coming in to recoup off of it, and that would mean more debt, which would mean higher services for everybody else. And where originally all the original things we were thinking about was hooking up those that were already there because they are customers now, the return would be quick coming in to allow them to expand out. I just want to share that with the commissioners to consider.
Can you repeat that last?
Sure. We had two ways of looking at it. One was future investment, or they could, place that may develop the most. But with that, means an outlay cash now with no return. The return might be in 5 years, 10 years, and it might take a long time to recoup several $1 million. The other option is to build and sewer where the customer already exists, so that your return is quicker coming back in. You get your hookups immediately, and you get potential monthly coming in on a regular basis to actually add to our pot of money we have to work with
That's the
here.
discussion we're facing.
To consider when you're looking at the idea of phasing. Because although it sounds good to go to the industrial area, but if you don't have any customers, we spend $13 million or $5 million to get there, and you have nobody to hook up but 2 or 5 ERUs.
What about the original, that one is the discussion today. I appreciate that your encouragement is to consider that. Looking at the proposed, or the language for the multifamilies, there was a reduced ERU,
75%.
0.7 per
I'm sorry,
unit.
0.7.
And I'm assuming that's either because of economies of scale or because the assumption that we use less water.
It was the assumption that you use less water. When they did their planning, they extrapolated a reduced water usage into that 70%.
Could that be extrapolated to the large uses as well of commercial, the kiosks, the people living in? Can we do it in economies of scale on the rates to reduce how many?
Yes, and the way that's done is through the other counties, unlike us where we actually charge them for every single ERU, what they do is they have an initial charge, which includes the basic rate, and then they have a per 100 cubic gallon rate that comes in afterwards. That's how all the other business areas are handled. The problem is if we were to do that, and believe me, it'd be nice, but that's where most of our money's coming from. And so if we were to drop the rate down to where we're even competitive with anybody else, I don't,
But
yes, it could be done quickly.
Other municipalities do it on the size of the connection, so a 1-inch connection, 2-inch, 4-inch,
Yeah.
based on your connection size. So your water system is how they base the ERUs.
Is that something that could be part of the rate analysis, or?
And you can, by incorporating it into the rate analysis, change it in such a way that the end result doesn't impact the amount of dollars coming in. So that you create the mechanism for developing a structure that identifies tiered costing, and then set up the costing in such a way that it doesn't change the ultimate incoming dollars today. But it gives you the opportunity to make those changes
If we ever
as
get
the
money ahead.
economics
Right.
allow those to begin to start to reduce costs.
And there's
To begin to start reducing the rates based on the mechanism.
Increase customers.
Right, once you've got increased customers, then you can start reducing the rates based on that structure which defines the by rate formula, which would be X on so many on a hookup and then volumetric pricing.
Am I encouraging uses of technology that would reduce your fats, oils, and greases and your total suspended solids, would reduce the waste strength coming out of some of your commercial locations, would reduce your maintenance costs? So, because the fats, oils, and greases really take a toll of your system, pumps and grinders, everything.
There is something else that is referenced in here that is kind of going the same direction that you've thrown on the table. That's a special benefit district. You could take your UGA and establish a special benefit district. And even though the folks that came in when we talked about the phase 2 and said, we want out of the UGA, we want to keep our septic systems, they benefit by having a sewer plant there. And the difference being an assessment versus utility rate. And there is a potential, I think, to come in and maybe charge a fraction of the utility rate. So even though you're up in River Hill, there's an opportunity to assess you $25 a month, or something like that. And that would go towards offsetting some of this.
And the special benefit, is that one where you have to do an appraisal of what the added
There
value
would
is?
have to be some sort of assessment done to determine what, or analysis done to determine what a viable assessment is. Because clearly, if you're not hooked to the sewer, you're not benefiting to the same extent of somebody that is, but they have the sewer plant there. There is a benefit. And people that's got property that could be developed benefit on a proportionally higher level. You know, so it's something.
And that would be dependent on the zoning as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's something to consider, and it is in here as, you know, one of the things that,
Is it-
yeah.
Yep.
They also have in their inclusion of strength of waste, that it can be charged differently, but that'd be a charge up, not a charge down to get us
Right.
comparable with anybody else, but it is in the plan that allows for us to charge differently. So otherwise, if they're giving us more dangerous or more hard to treat waters, we can charge them more.
You seem to have some experience with the special benefit. It's pretty costly to have that analysis done.
I wouldn't say so. Relatively speaking, you know, it's something that needs to be done very meticulously. The situation that I did it was in Edmonds, and the distinction there was very valuable waterfront property that was experiencing a lot of fecal contamination and seepage and was essentially undevelopable versus property that was up on the bluff that appeared to have no problems associated from their on-site septic, and yet they were the source of most of this problem down below down there. And it ranged from the Louboutin's Wharf, which was a large boathouse marina that had the potential to go condominiums down in the water that presently, at the time, was just kind of a minimal sort of marina, and then these acres of undeveloped property to the 12,000 square foot single-family residence up above. And at that time, there was only one or two people that were qualified to come in and do this. But by going through an analysis of what this property would be worth based on having sewer service and based on being developable or turning into condominiums or whatever down there, we were able to put together an assessment rule, and ultimately it stood up. The marina argued successfully that the condos weren't really a viable alternative down there.
And what would you do with that, like that $25 a month? What would you do with it?
Well-
Could you put that I mean,
What I'm thinking or suggesting is for your O&M, the capital costs at your plant and stuff like that.
but if that was charged to, say, the Riverdale or the Cliff Orange neighborhoods, wouldn't it, seems like it'd be more direct connection in that, because they can't hook up to the service, the sewer's not there, to put it into a capital reserve
Yes,
for that
exactly,
line.
exactly. Because you're gonna have a match when that line is, well, even now, with the DOE funding opportunity that's coming out this next month. Somewhere, if we go with something like that, you're gonna need some cash reserves.
Because down the line, we just have to, I mean, the big thing is where are we gonna get the funding for
Yeah.
construction of anything? And if we don't have a funding plan. PSIC is useless to us even,
Yeah.
as promising as it is. I still don't know who's to pay for that.
Yeah.
So,
But just to give you broad numbers, at $25 a month, if we were to expand that to 1,000 ERUs, that represents about $300,000 a year that can be put into a reserve, either for construction or for maintenance or for both.
Yeah, this needs to be very carefully thought through so that we're not doing something that's not consistent with the RCWs.
Yeah, because there's a little confusion of two different things you had mentioned. There's two types of benefit assessment district. One of them is for construction, an eventual benefit from it. The other is the benefit that they get, as you mentioned, because there's a sewer in place. But that benefit only applies to them if it's a different type of way of trying to figure out how much value their land has, because the other one, because you have a store that has a sewer. Those are two different things.
And they're both
And the other
identified
one-
in here
Yeah,
as two separate options.
yeah, the other one you have to produce. If you don't produce, you have to give back.
Yeah. But throwing that out there, trying to give you as many alternatives as we can, that's something to consider, I believe.
So what I have taken back was, before our next meeting, we need to come up with language modifications to the code to remove the holding tanks, address the $5,000 CFC charge, do a rate, come forward with some mechanisms towards a rate analysis. That would include potentially discounting for commercial volumes, and then also make modifications to the multifamily rate code. Then also we would look at what the impact is for phasing for new construction, proposed development, phasing into new construction or proposed development, or phasing into existing homes, and what the impact of the financial impact of that would be, the differences in those. As well as we'll do some more research on the ULID special assessment mechanism, how that would need to come forward.
I should make a little stronger request on something, because this is the third time that we've heard that part about bringing it back to us in a few weeks in regards to that $5,000 hookup. Can we not bring it back, or can we have that $5,000 hookup, please, brought to us so that we can put it for either passage or not within the next couple of weeks? We have to have that, we need that, not just keep bringing back a plan that will ask us again. We actually get it, so we have something to vote on, please.
Yes.
But I can roll it into the language I'm working on this, so.
and then I recall, I think that Jennifer's already done some analysis of what the overhead cost is for each of the utilities, is that correct?
We prepared some, tried to identify what the actual cost per ERU were for each of the utilities.
Yes.
We did that, I think, last summer.
So we're pretty close to that standardization piece across all our utilities.
Using that information, we can develop a program that would standardize that, yes. And still come up with a cost for Russellwood, a cost for Belfair, a cost
Right,
for
that's what I mean.
North Bay.
Where we
Yeah.
make sure and get things covered and be standardized across, at least how we're charging.
Mhm.
Do you have it, I mean, Jennifer gave me some sort of chart that showed admin, I think, but
The admin was, I think what she provided you for admin costs were based on the capital cost per utility, and we apportioned it back across all the admin staff.
Okay. Have you done the same for operator staff?
Well, the operators, no, the operators were tracked based on their actual time per utility.
Do you, as far as I know he's going to see, but has he developed a maintenance plan?
No, the stuff that we provided Frank with this, based on our discussions last week about the I don't want to say the aeration, it was the blower, yeah, the blower cost. We went back and tore through what we have in Belfair. And Bart, in the process of doing that, I asked him to, he says, oh, by the way, because we've got the pumps that we've been trying to get repaired in the lift stations. He says, well, the electrical storm gave us a surge and it cooked another pump, and then we've got bearings that need to be packed in another pumping system. And I asked Bart to give me a list of the maintenance costs that we need to identify or address here. And he provided.
Asset management piece of it yet. We haven't gotten that far yet.
We're still trying to wrap our arms around what we know is working and what's not working. And we haven't gotten to a place where we've got a programmatic maintenance management plan in place.
So we're kind of far from the standardization.
As far as developing a cost,
Capital costs.
I think it's more of a challenge in Belfair than it is elsewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Belfair facility, we're still learning what's going on, what's working, what's not working.
But we're pretty clear about what Russell Wood needs.
Yeah, I think North Bay, we've got a valve we need to fix in the one clarifier. But we still haven't got that done because we haven't been able to find people that can get the equipment in here and do this. The other facilities are a little bit more status quo. We're good with those. We're hoping to get in there with some water meters this summer sometime.
Right. Both Russell Wood and yours.
Yeah.
So, and you're working the same thing for the water rates, right?
Yeah.
Okay, any other thoughts, comments on?
Oh, God.
Well, guys, thank you so much.
Yeah, this is going to be fantastic, and I know you guys have been working very, very hard on this, and we're very appreciative of all those efforts. And
Jerry was cramming for the tests in the lunchroom. Really was asking.
Wasn't cramming for the test, it was the last second edit.
Yeah.
And I started through it at my office. Frank had sent me an email this morning, said, we've got a briefing and look at this.
And I got this from DOH, like at 4 o'clock last night. You know, the stuff I actually wanted, I got all these tables, I'm like, don't give me tables, give me something in crayon. something I can understand.
Just so that everybody knows, I'm okay with, it doesn't have to come back to us for a special briefing for the Belfair Sewer. If you come forward with that change for the 5,000 for the multifamily or whatever other hookup. Yeah, get it to a briefing and get it to us, just so we can.
Get it on the hearing calendar. That'll take a hearing, correct? Or will it?
Yes, I think so.
I think it would still be considered a rate change, wouldn't it?
Right.
Even though
That would require.
even though it's not a hookup, or even though it's a hookup, not a rate, but I don't know.
We'll have to look at that, to be specific.
Yeah.
whatever it takes.
Yeah, actually, let's go back to that, whatever it takes. Let's just
Yeah,
get it.
yeah. So, and when I was looking at Spokane this morning, actually they flip it, I mean, multi-housing actually costs a little more.
Really?
Yeah.
How do they just do that?
Larger pipe,
Yeah.
because he's right, some of the other things
It's on
I've seen,
pipe size.
some of the other
It's on
things
pipe
I've
size,
seen
yeah.
on charges and stuff does have to do with piping, so
Yeah.
they probably, but see, their hookup is also different than ours. We're doing ours individually
Yeah.
as an ERU that we're assigning to each one, where that's not how it's done in different places either. They have just a set fee for the building and stuff like that, so.
All right, very good. Well,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Never.
Yes.